It's Wednesday night in Douglas County, which, except for holidays, means there's a county commission meeting down at the courthouse. The world is 7 months into the throes of a pandemic. Everyone's still hunkering down inside for the most part, so commission meetings had shifted over to Zoom. About 10 minutes into the agenda, the commission got to it.
Moving on to item number 3, which is a repeal of resolution number 2003, authorizing the construction of capital improvement project of Douglas County.
Sounds pretty harmless, right? Resolution number 2003, quote, authorizing the construction of capital improvement project of Douglas County, unquote. Just for fun, I Googled the term capital improvement projects to see what comes up. Here are a few samples: building new libraries, replacing water lines with safer materials, repaving streets, acquiring parkland, providing power for residents. In other words, it could mean anything. Who knows what resolution number 2003 was referring to? Well, I can tell you, one group of people who happened to be organized into a force for good knew exactly what resolution number 2003 meant. It meant a much bigger jail. In today's episode, the Lion tells a couple of stories. Welcome to the Underdogs United Podcast, the podcast series dedicated to anyone curious about or deeply committed to organizing people into a force for good. Who knows? This could be your life's calling. I'm your host, Ben MacConnell. There's an old African proverb that goes something like this: until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero. It's meant to convey that history is often written from the point of view of those in power, that is to say, the hunter. And when they tell the story, it's full of guts and glory, victory and adventure, triumph, at least for the hunter. Rarely does the hunted lion get to tell the tale of their victories, but when they do, it's an altogether different story. So in this episode, we tell the story of triumph from the point of view of everyday citizens taking on leadership around critical issues in their community by organizing people into a force for good. It's a lion's tale because those in authority wanted nothing to do with it. A 6-year saga with enough drama, it could have been a podcast season on its own. The stories of people seeking a clean shot at improving the mental health care system while being forced to swallow more jail cells to get it. And after our show, a second installment of our segment, Storytime with Lee. Now, let's get back to the county commissioners meeting.
Do we have any public comment on this item?
I don't have anyone here at the courthouse.
Okay. So we have someone online, Jill?
We do have someone online, so I'll move them. We have a couple folks online. Go ahead, Brent.
Good evening, commissioners and county staff. I will begin my comment. It's a short comment, 2 parts.
That's Brent. He had the look of someone who could casually bench 1,000 pounds with one hand while drinking a protein shake with the other. Along with a number of other leaders in the organization, Justice Matters, he had been an integral part of the criminal justice reform campaign for years. Sometimes he got discouraged, but usually he relished the opportunity to challenge any waste of taxpayer money. Here's a sample of his comments that night.
Firstly, the immediate release of inmates without sacrificing public safety following the pandemic has exposed the great potential for criminal justice reform.
By this point, the group had been monitoring the number of people sitting in jail for years on a daily basis. In just a week or so prior to this meeting, a strange thing happened. The sheriff had swung open the doors, releasing people charged but not convicted of nonviolent offenses, and assured the public that they posed no threat to public safety whatsoever. This was a radical break from the standard talking points necessitated by the new COVID protocols. For 6 straight years prior, the sheriff and the commissioners who hold the purse strings to the budget were hell-bent on the need for a bigger jail, citing overcrowding as the dominant need. Then, a mass release with assurances of no threat to safety. This actually made sense to the members of Justice Matters on one level because crime had been down for years while the jail population kept rising. So the overcrowding made no sense at all. It's this obvious contradiction that made the group so nervous. I mean, if they went along on a bigger jail in order to get the mental health care system, they could wind up just contributing to mass incarceration. And their research had shown that if you build it, you're gonna fill it. So instead of all that, they wanted to figure out what the hell is going on. And beyond the problems of the local criminal justice system that's clearly not working well, was this whole other thing. Traces of it are found in Brent's second comment.
The other comment I have is related to the way that the Board of County Commissioners attempted to finance the jail expansion. It's pretty shady and undemocratic of the County Commission to use revenue from a vote that took place 25 years ago to finance a project that citizens of Douglas County voted not to fund just 2 years ago.
The sound on the recording is a little wonky due to the Zoom connection, but you may have caught it. Jail expansion had been put to the voters 2 years prior, under quite a bit of duress, which I'll explain later. And then Justice Matters organized yet again, and the voters said no to more jail cells. The county then countered and decided to fund the project anyway, using a sales tax that passed 25 years earlier. It was rotten. If people voted no in favor of alternatives to incarceration, why would our elected authorities turn around and do it anyway? Not to mention, if you already had the money, why dig in our pockets for more? This was just one move in a series of flagrant fouls.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Okay, thank you. This is the listening season for, I need to tell you where I live.
Brent wasn't the only voice from Justice Matters to make a public comment during the commissioners' meeting. Here's Barbara.
I've been a part of Justice Matters for the last 6 years and have worked, as you know, with the Criminal Justice Reform Committee for quite a long time. This is the listening season for us, and it's in the form of house meetings, and because they're all virtual.
Note for our listeners, we covered how good organizing ritualizes relationship building to strengthen the ties between people in episode 1. Barbara is describing this in real time.
We have 3 more meetings scheduled. There's a lot of anger out there and hurt, certainly not all because of this, but people are on edge. I hope that with this vote tonight can be a turning point so that we can work together for all the positive things that you're doing and that we want to do. And treatment for addictions is high on the priority list. And I think you know the other issues that we're working on. The racial issues are certainly high priority across the city right now. So thank you for considering this tonight, and we're trusting that your vote will make a turnaround for us. Thank you.
I really don't know what it sounds like to hear this for the first time, but you might be able to detect from their voices Brent and Barbara are weary. Justice Matters had been in this for 6 years, and the commission had discounted, dismissed, delayed, denied, and even tried to destroy the organization a little. In fact, the only thing that stopped the cranes from going up to expand the jail, right as Brent and Barbara were giving public comment that night, was a lawsuit brought by several community members who worked on the Jail No campaign. They argued in the suit that it was unfair for the commission to approve a project that voters had rejected. Technically, this issue needed to be settled in court before the construction could begin. The county commissioner's attorney countered by sending a letter threatening $3 million in damages from the faith group for holding up the expansion. I mentioned we're telling the story at the end, but it was 6 years in the making, and the local paper of record had printed 80 articles on the topic that covered Justice Matters work. To kind of tell the arc of the story, I asked my friend Rachel, a journalist, to come in and read all of the articles. She's going to be reading straight from the paper, focusing on the headlines in the order they appear. Hey, thanks, Rachel, for doing this. I really appreciate you digging through this stuff. Where did you decide to start?
Well, according to the newspaper archive, Justice Matters appears for the first time in the paper in 2014. The story had the headline, "Congregations Move Forward with Justice Organization." And the article announces the group for the first time to the public. The founding leaders share their hope that the group would be a vehicle for people to address any issue of justice in the area, and it described how they would ground their priorities based on listening to its members.
Yeah, that's right, Rachel. I actually brought this up in the first episode of the Underdogs United Podcast. The group surfaced improving mental health during their first series of house meetings in the fall of 2014. Then next spring in 2015, they sent a delegation of authorities to San Antonio to actually see for themselves a system of care that the group decided they wanted to see replicated back in their community.
And that's where the headline in April 2015 appears. Douglas County leaders tour San Antonio mental health facilities. As I understand it, we have some audio from Bill Wood, a leader from the group who had loved ones stuck in a broken mental health system. And he was one of the members of Justice Matters that went down, I believe, with Pastor Kathy Williams.
Yeah, you got it. Pastor Kathy was elected co-president of the organization by its members, and her and Bill had recounted the mood coming back from the trip in San Antonio with later interviews.
And we were really impressed about what we saw in San Antonio. They had this campus that was just phenomenal.
And I could see hope in people's eyes, and I could hear the hope in their voices. And they said, you know what, we can do this.
But there was some trouble even early on, as it appears in the reporting. In the story, 2015, I believe Justice Matters had organized 1,700 people to publicly call on officials to begin planning the creation of what they saw in San Antonio.
Yep. You got it. 1,700 members of Justice Matters came together to publicly call on the county to begin planning what they saw in San Antonio. And about 16 hours before that event, that very morning, the newspaper talked to one of the commissioners about Justice Matters. It seemed like there was an effort to get ahead of the organization by delegitimizing them even before they made their first move.
Yeah.
Do you want to read for the listeners the headline above the fold?
Honestly, it looks like a disaster. I mean, in large, bold font, the newspaper looks like it's screaming at its readers with the headline, "County Commissioner Dean's Justice Matters Event Inappropriate."
Yeah.
And I read this really carefully, but I couldn't figure out what was going on. It seemed like maybe one of the county commissioners was taking issue with a group getting organized to improve mental health. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Is that it?
Yeah, it does seem strange, doesn't it, that people in positions of authority got allergic when their constituents started to get organized and actually have ideas on how to improve their mental health system. Have you ever seen the movie Chicken Run?
Yeah.
Let me set the scene for the listeners. So there's this beatific farm with these wonderful chickens who are constantly trying to escape because, they're getting pushed harder and harder to produce more eggs. And you see the farmer's wife in the back room. She's complaining about how little profit she makes from the eggs.
Stupid, worthless creatures. I'm sick and tired of making minuscule profits.
But she's going through the mail, and lo and behold, there's this advertisement about how you can make more money if you stop producing eggs and start killing chickens for their meat. And the soundtrack leads up to this crescendo.
Oh, yes.
Because she decides we're going to start killing these chickens. But the husband is looking out at the window and he sees the chickens whispering, talking.
They're organized, I know it.
Sit quiet.
That ginger one, I reckon she's their leader.
Mr. Tweedy! And they finally have found a way to make us some real money around here. And what are you on about? Ridiculous notions of escaping chickens. It's all in your head, Mr. Tweedy. Say it.
It's all in me head. It's all in me head.
Now, you keep telling yourself that because I don't want to hear another word about it. Is that clear?
Yes, love. But you know that ginger one.
It's chickens, you dolt! Apart from you, they're the most stupid creatures on this planet. They don't plot, they don't scheme, and they are not organized.
All right, so yeah, that's a children's movie. What does this have to do with the headlines the morning of the Justice Matters event?
I'm just saying that a lot of farmers get nervous when the chickens organize and start getting ideas of their own. But that's a diversion. You want to get back to the articles?
No, actually. Why don't you say more about that?
Well, it's psychological on one level. You see, this is my thoughts. People in authority put themselves out there. In this case, they ran for office. Their name was on the ballot. They raised the money and enlisted volunteers. They knocked on doors. They did the interviews with the local press. They put yard signs out there, and they won. So they might not say this exactly, but in my years, I think that victory in their mind has earned them the right to ultimately decide the course of public decision-making.
Well, isn't that the way it works?
I completely disagree on philosophical and practical grounds. I mean, just in spirit, I don't think people's participation in deciding the future of their neighborhood, community, city, workplace, state, nation can be distilled down to voting every so often. It is a crucial source of accountability, but in this case, the group has taken responsibility to listen to hundreds of people, elected their own priorities for the future of their city, trained everyday citizens to analyze the problems related to the mental health system, and brought real solutions to the table with evidence to prove that they work. Then, when they ask for those in authority to come and respond to their proposals, one of 3 commissioners runs to the paper to call the event inappropriate even before it takes place. If I was on that guy's staff and there were a group of people getting organized into a force for good, I'd try as hard as I could to get my boss to set aside his ego and learn the meaning of mutual respect. But even on a practical level, I happen to think that the best and most innovative work to alleviate suffering would surface through commitments freely made between people in a spirit of partnership. That's how I've seen things in other areas of my life. There are better outcomes when everyone involved in the decision respects one another and works toward the best solutions.
And you're saying this article is not that?
Yeah, and I don't mean to personalize it with this individual whatsoever. What I'm trying to say is it's baked in. Most farmers don't want their chickens getting organized. Honestly, whether they're planning a factory farm, a bigger jail, better conditions in their workplace, or drafting their budgets, because that would mean they'd have to share power. I could go on and preach about the fact that partnership requires mutual respect, but most of those in authority that I have watched only grant respect to groups once they've demonstrated some power. And organizing in general, the power comes from organizing large numbers of people.
Is that why this group organized to get 1,700 people there that night?
Yeah. I mean, if there were 50 people there, you would not have seen the summary of the event written up in the paper the next day the way it was.
Yeah, I see your point. I mean, compared to the day before the event screaming it will be inappropriate, the next day seemed like it was just a fizzling out. It reads, hundreds gather for justice. Officials agree to group's challenges.
Right. When authorities are presented with well-researched solutions to problems, they may selectively listen. When 1,700 people in a town of 90,000 show up in an organized fashion and they see clear answers to their proposals, the level of respect and commitment alters. So you see officials like the chief of police, other members from the county commission, the mayor of the biggest city in the county, They take their ideas seriously. The power of those people assembling as one is the whole shooting match.
Okay, got it. So there's a small hitch in the beginning, but the group does appear to be off to the races in establishing a mental health campus like the one in San Antonio. But I can't help but notice the mental health campus begins to get married to a completely separate priority, a bigger jail. So you can start seeing this divergence in the path between Justice Matters and the county commission. I mean, in one direction, you see the feature story on the organization in January 2017 with the headline, Jail Issues or Racism, Justice Matters bows to be the voice of the, quote, unheard. But then on the other side of the coin, there's this other direction being spelled out by county authorities, quote, Sheriff urges Douglas County Commission to make jail expansion a priority, unquote. And this article, quote, Jail Expansion Crisis Center would require public vote on new taxes, officials say.
Exactly. The 2015 event with 1,700 people present charts a course toward a mental health crisis center like the one in San Antonio. And then afterwards, the county commission is putting these two pieces together with their interest in building a bigger jail. It actually leads to a story, I think it's in 2018, where the editor of the paper himself actually pens this article.
It reads, the headline, Many residents want to vote separately on jail, mental health projects. There's a way, but county unlikely to go there, unquote. That must have granted some hope to the members of Justice Matters. I mean, the editor of the local paper is laying out this plan where the group didn't have to go along with jail expansion to get the mental health system they wanted.
It did offer some hope that they could just get a clean shot at voting for the mental health system by themselves and not have to weigh in on the bigger jail. But honestly, it didn't last long. I think that article is followed by something pretty shortly thereafter.
The paper 2 days later says Douglas County Commission agrees to put jail expansion, behavioral health campus on the same ballot, unquote. I mean, I know from reading the article, but why didn't Justice Matters agree to support a tax to fund a bigger jail in order to get the mental health system they wanted?
The answer to that question is super important, and I want to point out, to decide whether they were going to move forward and go along with the bigger jail, the leaders really took that decision extremely seriously. They had completely bought into what they had seen down in San Antonio. They wanted to divert people away from jails with mental health issues and directly put them into treatment. And they also wanted to expand the opportunity for people to walk in and get treatment of their own. So there was no question the group was entirely in on the mental health campus. But marrying that as one single up and down vote on the ballot really made them complicit in the decision to build a bigger jail. So they wanted to figure out if that was right. And they did their homework. They relied on experts from the Brennan Center for Justice, the Center for Advancing Correctional Excellence, Appleseed, and also in particular the Vera Institute for Justice, which had at that time, back in 2019, had just shed light on the impact of your local jail. Let's run a clip of Jasmine Heiss from Vera explaining what they saw in Douglas County.
Often when we talk about mass incarceration, it evokes this huge and abstract number of people, an estimated 2.1 to 2.2 million people who are behind bars prior to the declines brought by the COVID-19 pandemic. But in reality, every local jail, including the Douglas County Jail, is part of this phenomenon. And what we've seen over the past several decades is that while incarceration and mass incarceration is often imagined as a big city issue, small cities and rural communities have the highest rates of incarceration, and that their jail populations have continued to rise as big cities close jails and cut jail and prison populations. So when we talk about mass incarceration and the local jail, we are talking about fewer people behind bars and jails every day than in state and federal prisons, but about 18 times more people being sent to jail each year. So a huge reach of these facilities into communities. They're also where some of the most pernicious and harmful aspects of mass incarceration begin to come into sharp relief. The majority of people behind bars in local jails every day are unconvicted. And most of those people are just behind bars because they're too poor to pay money bail. Others may be locked up for things like driving on a suspended license or unpaid probation fines and fees. We also see the legacy of the war on drugs in our nation's jail populations. People who are locked up for substance use related offenses because they struggle with substance use disorder or even mental health, since so often those two pieces are co-occurring. We also see Black people are about 3.5 times more likely to be sent to jail than white people in this country. And that reflects disparate criminalization, different policing of neighborhoods, Black people being treated more harshly and punished more severely at every single part of the justice system. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say this is part of a longer history. Prior to the abolition of slavery, jails were used to punish and control the poor, locked up for vagrancy offenses and other offenses meant to criminalize the movement and existence of poor bodies. And after slavery's abolition, we see the entire justice system, including local jails, being used to even more harshly punish and criminalize Black people. And today, the people who suffer most because of our justice system are overwhelmingly Black, brown, and poor. The hopeful note to end on is that this is not inevitable. It is not any nation's or community's destiny to be part of mass incarceration. It is possible, as we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, to rapidly decarcerate, an estimated 25% national decline in the number of people behind bars. It simply involves communities, prosecutors, judges, and probation officers, the entire justice system, making choices not to criminalize the poor, not to criminalize the sick, and to invest on the front end in communities and resources.
But they went beyond even just academic experts. They also relied on public information, which showed most people were serving time at the local jail for non-violent technicalities like missing a court date on a traffic ticket or waiting for a mental health treatment review. And they also sought the expertise of those with lived experience. The talking points for those who were in favor of a bigger jail was that they were going to alleviate the suffering of overcrowding for those on the inside. But leaders from Justice Matters stood outside the jail for weeks, especially over the holidays, and interviewed people as they visited loved ones and found one overwhelming theme. People would prefer freedom. The thinking behind that lesson actually became part of the talking points. One pastor involved in the group ironically described the false notion of, quote, compassionate incarceration. When you're seeing people getting locked up for meaningless technicalities like not being able to show up for court, and you're also witnessing your crime rate dropping, but your jail population exploding, relatively speaking, you have to ask yourself, why don't we just figure out another solution than to throw money at this problem and continue to lock up people? And they voted internally to, take a stand against the bigger jail in the name of alternatives to incarceration. But it was not without a lot of consternation on the inside. Here they were out of the gate trying to get mental health, and they get hitched to this whole other priority. And the rhetoric actually gets more and more challenging as the vote comes up.
Yeah, I have to admit, just the days before the election, the county paints a pretty bleak picture for the future if the jail expansion doesn't get voted in.
That's right. I mean, the county was basically saying if the electorate decided not to raise taxes to pay for the mental health center and the jail expansion, they will never revisit the idea of a mental health system. It's this or nothing. And then on top of that, they started to say they were going to build the jail anyway, whether people voted it down or not. And then one layer of detail, which seemed really, really weird, was the county said in order to pay for the bigger jail, if there's a no vote, they're going to cut social services. So all of a sudden, The whole mental health system, realizing that this is the only opportunity they had, according to the county commission. The local historical museum also, whose budget is tied to the county commission for public funding, coming out in favor of a big jail.
That seems really weird to announce before the vote that they're going to build a bigger jail, whether the taxpayers fund the sales tax or not. And the way they're going to fund it is by cutting social services. I mean, that sounds insane.
So yeah, Justice Matters organized, and they talked about bigger jails and lots of taxpayer money. One way or another, after this vote goes down, they're going to get mental health care system on the ballot alone and by itself. Morning of the vote, when people are walking into their polls to decide whether or not they're going to have a bigger jail and a mental health system, Justice Matters was holding their breath.
So in the newspaper the day after the election, it's pretty clear the vote went down. People did not vote for a bigger jail, and subsequently, because they were married to the mental health system, they also voted down a mental health care system. What was the group thinking after that?
Justice Matters started going down to county commission meetings and demanding the mental health system get on the ballot. Lo and behold, they finally respected the power of the organization, put it on the ballot alone, and the electorate overwhelmingly voted in favor. I mean, I haven't seen that many people voting in favor of getting taxed in my lifetime, but mental health care was so important to the community.
What about the jail?
They went ahead and started talking about how they were going to fund a bigger jail. They did, however, say they were not going to cut any social service budgets. They actually said, no, we're going to figure out how to budget this using a sales tax passed 25 years ago. And that brings us to the start of this story.
So thank you for considering this tonight, and we're trusting that your vote will make a turnaround for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Appreciate your comments. Any other public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll bring it back up to the commission.
I move to repeal resolution number 20-03, authorizing the construction of capital improvement project of Douglas County.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Passes 3-0. Thank you, commissioners. Thanks for the public comment, folks. Moving on to item 2.4.
Okay, but one thing that nagged at me is I read all of the articles that mention the word justice matters, but when the county actually votes to just suspend any expansion of the jail, the organization's not featured at all. However, they're the central organized effort in the city to address the issue.
I think you bring up a good point, and it's sort of the theme of this whole episode. Justice Matters organized into a force for good. It identified the need for mental health. They proposed solutions in this mental health campus, and they charted the course toward that project, to which they got buy-in from voters and those in authority. It got married to a bigger jail. They did their homework on that and realized it's rotten. Got that voted down, even at the risk of losing their mental health care system, and then put mental health front and center alone on the ballot, and it passes overwhelmingly. Now you have thousands of people that are benefiting from the expanded care, and you have a jail that has fewer people than it did 5 years ago. Why doesn't the lion get mentioned in the article? I don't know. But I do know this. There's this whole history that doesn't get told. And so people don't understand that when they get organized, they can impact things. And, you know, there's the lions themselves, the people who were involved. When I think about what I saw in them, I marvel at their guts to put themselves on the line, not so much for speaking out in public, but speaking out to their neighbors and fellow members of their congregations to inform and encourage them to act. It reminds me of something Lee Staples, the author of Roots to Power, said when I was interviewing him for the first podcast.
There's something about the values, the philosophy, the methodology of organizing that brings, I won't say all the best in all of us, but it brings out a lot of good.
I watched Brent grow to respect that people should have a voice in decisions. Barbara, she feels redeemed for saying nothing when she was a child and her black friend had to be sent home because the town didn't let African Americans out after dark. Bill took the suffering in his daughter's struggle with mental illness and turned it into urgency for a mental health treatment center. And Kathy, a pastor who honestly didn't seem to really change much, but smiled at the opportunity to do what she felt inside. A feeling a pastor named Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who stood up against the Nazi regime, articulated as a mandate for people of faith. He said, "We are not simply here to bandage the wounds of victims beneath the wheels of injustice. We are to drive a spoke into the wheel itself." So, it's not just the lion's story itself that's unique from the hunters. It's the fact that the lion's path, and anyone else who strives to organize people into a force for good, well, it brings out a lot of good. A lot of good. That'll do it for our second episode in this series. If you learned anything from this episode, I hope it's this. First and foremost, organizing works. Second, until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero. Now, you may be asking yourself, why don't we tell the names of those in authority or name the actual place where all of this happened? You could probably pick it up from the details that are shared, but I didn't want to say all that because these stories of people getting organized into a force for good and the authorities that dismiss them can really take place anywhere with anyone. So, if this has pricked your curiosity in organizing, or you already are an organizer and you need a shot in the arm, hit the subscribe button. Next month, we're going to take a closer look at the role of a professional organizer. But before we go,
Story time with Lee.
These were low-income homeowners or lower middle-class homeowners who were being harassed for being delinquent on their property tax bills, just slightly. Mm-hmm. And the city was, some incredible $30 million in arrears. And people would complain, and I'd say, I don't get it. I'm a week late with my tax bill, and I get these threatening letters and threatening to put a lien on the property or my wages or whatever. Well, we said, let's do a little bit of research. And might it be that there's a double standard here and that some wealthy taxpayers, particularly corporations and businesses, are not paying they've got the tax bills, but they're not paying them and they're in arrears and nobody's being very aggressive. So organized a bunch of people and we went to the city hall and politely asked to see the books. And of course, we were met with very hostile, incredible response, and they called the police and so forth. And we stayed just long enough to kind of get it on the media. And, one of the ways to demystify or kind of change a little bit the relations of power is to use humor and so forth. And without going on and on about this one, but it was a really fun campaign. It was around the holidays. We developed Christmas carols with different words, and we went to a nursing home that was in arrears, and we had very sophisticated research. We actually found that money from the nursing home was being laundered up in Canada, money for the mob, which the mob does in Mexico. We didn't take on the mob, But we also knew that the mob didn't want to draw attention to this. This is just, chicken feed for them. So they're out there with relatives and so forth on a Saturday morning on the meteor and just going after this nursing home chain, which was dirty.
Yeah.
And they paid the bill real quick because we never said a word about the mob. We're not stupid. You just, you got that up your sleeve and you're not going to play that card, but you know that they are probably aware. So you use what you can.
I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks to Rachel for sorting through the newspaper archive and help me tell the Jail No story. This episode is dedicated to the tireless leaders at Justice Matters who continue to this day now to eliminate homelessness and to provide the care that our elderly need in the community. There's more to say, but that's all for now.